this episode of the podcast is a part 2 of a conversation with Miss Analisa Gomez. So if you'd like part 1, you can check the description below. Otherwise, allons-y, and I hope you enjoy. What do you think of me wearing the bow ties? What do you think first?
I like bow ties, honestly. I really like bow ties. I like the symmetry of them. The, regular ties, a lot of times guys will tie, asymmetrical knots. And I definitely prefer symmetrical knots, and so bow ties are just the obvious choice.
Okay.
If you're gonna it's interesting because a bow tie could be very formal, but it could also be almost playful and fun. And so I think it's you can style that different ways. So I like bow ties.
Okay. I like the fun aspect of them. I just think I look better without a tie in general. Maybe even with regular ties. That's why I'm kind of curious. I've been thinking about... I like it because it's playful. I like it to make it my signature on my podcast. But maybe I look better without it. I don't know.
I think all the...
I've seen you wear a tie. I think you've definitely pulled off the look. Especially because I think you have a decent sense of how to style it, in the sense making sure the colors all go together. And that's that's the main thing I think you have to do, is make sure that all the colors go together. After that, you can kind of, like you said, make it your signature. Roger Kimball, I don't think anything he wears ever matches, but he is, one, he's confident enough to pull it off, and two, the colors and oh lord, let me silence this. And even the way that he has the patterns go together.
Okay. Oh, sure. You don't think there's too much of a nerdy look, given that I wear the glasses?
It could be, but
I don't know. I guess it could be nerdy, but I think then it depends more on what you wear.
Yeah, if I wore khakis, it makes it look worse.
Yeah, maybe if you wear khakis. Or, the one thing, every once in a while you would wear shorts and the bow tie, and then you look like a tall child.
Sade told me that same thing. What? She said boyish look, something like that.
Yeah, I think shorts and a bow tie might push it, and khakis and a bow tie, yeah, maybe.
Khakis, bow tie, and jacket, I think. I can't do blazer and khakis. I don't really like that look. It has a Tucker Carlson feel to it, and I don't really like that. Not that I don't have anything against Carlson, but...
Yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah. Yeah, khakis and a jacket, or a blazer, definitely. It seems too casual to have also the bow tie. Yeah. At that point, I think you're going more into the playful, fun, I guess kind of quirky aspect. Yeah.
I have squirrels on this one, so I'm leaning into the fun to some degree. What's his name? Greg Hurwitz really liked that. Really liked it when I had the bees or the dinosaurs or the squirrels. That he liked those playful aspects. But when I was talking to Anand, he didn't like the bright yellow bow tie with the blue stars or whatever was on it, or on that bow tie, because it kind of has a kooky professor look. And I think he's right, especially with that bow tie. It's a bright bow tie.
Yeah, bright yellow.
Hold on. I needed to get this tie for a costume. I was using it as a belt. But if you look at this, it's gold. And then it has kind of pale blue stars on it. And I don't know, this would have to be... I think this would be a really nice accent piece, maybe in a light gray suit.
But other than that, it would probably not. It probably wouldn't go very well with other stuff. So again, it just really depends on what you're gonna be selling with. Yeah, the the bright yellow with blue stars. I think it's because of the stars.
Like the stars are kind of out there in that regard.
When I was in New Orleans, I was dressed in my more standard tank top and running shoes outfit, and I didn't quite realize how gay that was until I'm walking around and half the guys there are dressed exactly like me.
Yes.
I wish someone told me that. That would have been good to know.
I don't know. I guess at some point people figure and you're just going to like you're gonna do what you're gonna do. Like your bow ties, you're gonna do your bow ties because that's your thing.
Sure.
But like, yeah. I remember the last thing we were going over was redemption, and I think you had mentioned something about like the Little Mermaid was something you wanted to like go into.
Yep.
But as far as like good and then better, I think it would be right to say that that's something that has more to do with like faith, because you can't necessarily like, you have to on faith believe that there is something greater, better, or else like you're kind of just stuck where you are as being like the best thing that there can be. Like if you accept the premise that like being is good, there's no like there's not really a way to get higher than that of something beyond good or the ultimate good without that leap of faith. So in that sense, I think that that's very much necessary. You need to have the faith in order to reach the next level.
Okay, so I was gonna say almost the opposite. So to kind of bounce off what I was saying earlier, than to argue against what you're saying, it seems that you have to have both premises. That you have to have the notion that being is good, being with a capital B is good, but also simultaneously that betterness exists. Those are the two fundamental premises, I think, of Christian doctrine. So I think you can make the case that that's reflected in the notion of you need faith and you need works. So faith would be, so this is where I disagree. Is I say faith is the goodness, that being is good. That's where faith stands. And then the betterness exists, like that. I'll leave it at that for a second. And that betterness exists. That's the works. That's, you are insufficient and you need to continue to work to do better. So you could say, I'm curious how you're going to respond to this. But when you're thinking about the duophysite nature of Christ is good in that he's divine. He is perfect and he has that godlike aspect to him, but he's also human, and he also has to undergo everything that's involved with the crucifixion. So I think that's the Jewish nature of the divinity of God mixed with you're insufficient, you have original sin, and you're making that anagogical ascent from nature to the forms, from the Hellenic tradition, coming together within the resurrection. That you need faith, you also need works, and that with that comes the resurrection. What do you make of that? I don't know, because you were saying faith requires something higher, and that has to exist. So that implies betterness. So that would stand against the argument that I just made.
Well,
the only thing is that like if you're putting it down to the level of faith, like faith comes
in at the level of being as that being is good, then I think if you're looking at it from a Christian perspective, what kind of bumps up against that is the whole concept of sin and like the fallenness of humanity. And so right. It's more like an automatic given, like where the works, I think, come in, to where like we're already in this lower state. We're like, even though being
itself is good, we're not the most that we can be, even as we are now. And so it is in
Right. And that's the human aspect. That's the works aspect. That we are insufficient. We have their original sin. We have to make strides through the crucifixion to reach something beyond. But I guess you could say that also requires faith. That it requires the acceptance of something that is above you, like that. And maybe you could just make the Thomas Aquinas argument and say any premise that you put forward has to require faith, and then you move through reason to come to know everything else. But and fair enough. Maybe we could just leave it at Aquinas, but I think there's an element to Christianity where it's moving from nature to the forms, and you get as high as you can, but beyond that, you need the grace of baptism to move. Like you get to the vestibule, and then you move up through Peter's Gate and onto purgatory, etc., to paradise. So that it has to be a faith that something beyond you exists.
Yes, well, the faith, the like start of the journey, if you like, even like for the Jews, like there was already an understanding that there is God beyond, like, or like the all-encompassing one that is God. And so for the Christian, it was more the turn towards Jesus. You had to have faith that this Son of God, God incarnate, is the final
sacrifice. And I think for, at least for me, that's where it starts to get a little more tricky, because like I was saying, there's simultaneously the understanding or
there's like the proposition that being is good, and obviously like God would not have sacrificed himself
for being
as we are, like for the redemption of who we, like of what we've become, without it being good in some sense. In some way there must be good.
But also, like,
none of that would have had to happen if there was no lesser fallen nature
part of it. So I guess
in that sense, it's kind of tough to, I don't know if you could say like try and separate
it, or like maybe all those sort of like mesh together. But there's a very heavy understanding that, like, and this is where like Calvin and the I guess all the way I suppose to start with Luther.
The understanding that you, like when Jesus says, no one comes to me unless the Father calls them. And so
there's that
like simultaneously you have been chosen by God. You are
chosen before the foundation of the earth.
But simultaneously at the same time, which is where it gets so like it's so interesting.
Because at the same time, you have the option
to say no. Like that's not, I'm not going to believe in you. I'm
not going to follow you. I'm not going to do any of that. So it's interesting because simultaneously you have those who are called and those who will just say no. Like it could be that they do have a call, but they're just
not going to follow it. Kind of like it's not quite the same, but you get that like with Elijah and Elisha, where God
kept telling Elijah to basically stop being
scared of Jezebel. Like obviously, like I'm not in the earthquake. I'm not in all these things. I'm in the still
place. And you're basically protected.
Like it's essentially him saying like, I'm in your corner. What
scared of if I am in your corner?
And still Elijah's just saying, oh, I and I alone, I'm all
down here. And then basically that's the end of it for him. He's not, that's when it's Elisha's turn to take over. So
what do you think? What do you think Elijah or anyone else whose faith is shaky afraid of? Because if you're saying the sunum bonum is in your corner at all times, even as the still small voice, then why shouldn't everyone have faith in the darkness?
Faith in the darkness? What do you mean?
I mean like faith amidst the darkness.
Oh, faith while in the darkness.
Right, sorry.
They shouldn't.
English is not a good language to do philosophy in.
Ento scoto. Well, they shouldn't. Nobody should actually be like. Nobody should be like legitimately afraid
of those things. It's one thing to be like shaken and scared and like startled and caught off guard, and when you come into contact with things that are
like in that sort of other realm, this is where you get like that whole like the entire part of like demonology. It like any of those spirits or demons coming into contact with something that is in like, especially in like our own physical understanding beyond that, is going to be it's going to really shake you one way or another. But when you like, if you have a true understanding of where you stand and who you stand, or rather who, like, what covering you're under, there's no real reason to be truly afraid of it. Like, I'm more worried about like homicidal maniacs than I'm worried about demons, because that's not my problem. They're not my problem. Like that. Like I have a bigger stick. And so it's really strange, because a big thing
that, like with Elijah, he was so worried. It was so strange, because it seems like he was so sure about God being in his corner when he was facing
priests of Baal. I think it was Baal or Baal. And yet the moment that Jezebel decided that she was going to kill him, he was terrified. Which to me seems backwards. It seems so strange. It's like he was more sure about the spiritual than he was about the physical. And I guess to some point I understand that, but also on another point, being a Christian, like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna kill me? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go be with the Lord. That's unfortunate. Like, it's a strange circumstance being Christian.
Well, I think that kind of points it towards what do you make of Nietzsche's criticism then? That there is this too much of an emphasis on the afterlife after Plato, say. That you aren't... Okay, I want to ask that question. Why do you think that there's too much of do you think there's too much of an emphasis on the afterlife and not on the here and now with the body? And then, this is something I've never understood about Christianity. What on earth do you make of the resurrection of the body? I have no idea whatsoever to think about that, because there is this emphasis in Christianity where it's not your somatic experience, it's not your body, it's heaven. But there's also something even beyond heaven, in that one day we're all going to be resurrected, and then it's this re-emphasis back on the body. I have no idea what to make of that idea, like not even a clue. So first, what do you make of Nietzsche's criticism, and then resurrection of the body?
Nietzsche's criticism, I think it's a valid criticism in that, like, the dogma can definitely go to the point of
like degrading almost the here and now, making it essentially worthless. And there are some senses like store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. But
like, on the same token, I can't agree with that entirely, because if you look at the original job of man, the capital M, it was to be a steward of the earth. And so it really doesn't make any sense to me to like discount this life entirely, because there is
originally a charge. Like, we are charged with the responsibility of not just like being stewards, but like Adam had to name all the animals, and I think the plants also. And so it was almost,
he was like almost bringing them into being, like giving them an identity. And like the value of that, like
that.
He's participating in creation in that sense. And so if the original job,
The perfect man,
was to participate in creation in this way, then I don't see how we can completely discount life as we know it. Because there's like everything that happens in this life is participating in the greater
what is it in the
what is it in the Our Father? I'm sorry, I'm not Catholic.
You're all right. That has to do with what? Naming?
On earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
That's the line in there.
Our Lord in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. On earth as it is in heaven, right? Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven.
Yes. So yeah, yes, kingdom come will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so everything that you do on earth is still
to be a part of the will of God.
And so like in that sense, I don't like Nietzsche's critique of the dogma that would have
gone against that idea, I think
is completely valid. If like him critiquing that particularly, I like that makes perfect sense to me, because I don't agree
with that mindset at all.
As far as resurrection of the body,
I suppose this is a good way to get into redemption, because
the whole, I think I mentioned last time that the Bible
is like a love story. Like God is trying to
redeem back to him his children, his
first love, his bride
of the church, all these, it's all like God has made the greatest sacrifice to bring them back to him, to bring us back to him. And in that, if you think about Dante again, Divine Comedy, where earthly paradise is the peak of Mount Purgatory, that's where everybody should have started from. And so if you're thinking about the idea of the resurrection of the body, of bringing us back to where we should have been to begin with, walking with God in the garden, then like in that sense, I don't know how symbolic it's supposed to be. I don't know how literal it's supposed to be, but that image of walking with God in the garden under his covering, is that's what I think of when I consider the resurrection of the body, of like returning to that sense, like, and in that sense, like this current form, this current body, this current world in general must go away so it can be reformed into the perfection that God had originally intended.
Okay. So let me see if I can summarize exactly what you said, and you can tell me if it's accurate. So in response to Nietzsche, your answer is something like, there is this injunction within Christianity to bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. So as a consequence, there is this sense that we are going to go to heaven or hell one day, and sure, but there's also this sense where it's incumbent on us in the here and now within Christianity to do good works at the very least, and hopefully bring heaven to earth. And then the second point on the resurrection of the body is that whatever God created originally would be something like what he wanted, and then we fell, and now we're working to restore that relationship with him, and that would be in the Garden of Eden when we're walking with him with a scale still on our eyes, I suppose. Do you think that when I was talking to Yenti, she made a point that it isn't really seen as a fall within Judaism, that there isn't this sinful, there's not this original sin aspect to it that Paul kind of really brings in, and then Augustine, etc. But at least within a Christian context, we're trying to reach that earthly paradise, because that's what God originally created, and that's what we're trying to restore, bringing about probably something like bringing about heaven on earth. Maybe that's heaven on earth, each at the top of Mount Purgatory in the Garden of Earthly Paradise. What do you think? What do you make of all that? First, is that a reasonable summary of what you said?
I think so. I think that's a reasonable summary. There's also the aspect of like once you get like there's still all of Revelation, and so there's still the whole idea that there is going to be great trial and tribulation and like destruction that comes before anything can return to what it should have been before, because everything that has like and then that kind of goes towards the whole goes toward the idea of the fall, I suppose, is that everything kind of has to be burned away in a sense before the new and potentially the better can grow back.
Sure.
I think that would be the only thing.
Before Eden, the cherub has a sword that faces all directions, a flaming sword that faces all directions. So it's supposed to be cutting away absolutely everything except for that which you need in order to get into earthly paradise.
Right. And so I think that would be the only thing, is that there is a burning away that will happen before, and if it's earthly paradise we get back to, or if it's something higher than that, there's the idea of like a new heaven and a new earth, I believe, in Revelation. And so it's not just a new earth, it's new heaven. It's something like there's something, it's new, and the idea would be that it would be something greater. So yeah, I think those would be the two things. So there's some sort of burning away, and then there's also I guess like a promise that it's not just going to be what was given to Adam and Eve, but something more.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. I want to poke at something you said earlier with taking part in creation through speech, and through Adam naming. Adam through speech names all the animals, and you said maybe some of the plants. I don't know if that's true or not as well, but
yeah,
I'm sure someone can. I'm sure someone can correct us. Right. And there's this element where it seems like he brings them into being. Why do you say that there's this element that brings him into being? I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I'm curious as to why.
Well, one thing about the creation story, some people call it the creation myth, and I think I know why they call it that. What they call it the creation myth is because it's a story that has been so distilled that everything has so much meaning in it. It's become highly symbolic. I think we were talking about that last time, where like you have these like this sort of like abstraction that happens up to the symbolic. And so the creation story in Genesis is so full. It's like so pregnant with meaning that you see these parts of being itself, like the actions that take place are kind of reflected at all levels of I suppose existence or experience. And so it seems like Adam naming the animals is almost like the next step down of God speaking the world into existence. So there's like this like going down the mountain, going into multiplicity effect happening. So it was God, like the world, man, and then the animals going down. And then there's also that like that whole idea. There's an idea that Eden was like a mountain, or like on top of the mountain. So like that's kind of where the idea of earthly paradise being on top of Mount Purgatory comes from, because there was this idea that it was kind of that shape. So Adam had to.
I think that's mentioned in Elijah, that Eden was on top of a mountain. Might be Isaiah or one of the prophets, but it's in the Bible.
Yes, it's definitely it pops up, and so there's like all of that is built into it. So in that sense, you have that participation in creation because it's moving out into the multiple, and so he's sort of he's giving them a name, just the way that like God gave Adam a name.
Okay, so it's something like because Eden is on the top of a mountain, and the mountain is that which is closest to God, then the actions that take place at the top of the mountain are closest to, are most akin to the actions that God himself took. And then as you move down the mountain, you're moving from, you were saying unity and the multiplicity, if I'm getting that right. And as you're doing that, you're moving farther away. The actions therein resemble less the actions of God in that original act of creation. Does that seem like a good summary?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I would say resemble less, but I think it's almost like a I don't maybe it's the same thing, but it's almost like it's almost like it's trying to mirror. Like I don't know if it's maybe that's the same thing, but it's like everything that happens farther down the mountain is a mirroring of what happens higher up. Just like
if you're God and you're all good and all powerful, etc., then you're that which everyone should be striving to aim, and that would to use the language that you just used, that would be mirrored perfectly in principle. Like if earthly paradise of Eden is perfect because that's what God wants, then that would be something like a 1-1 mapping. That's what we should be striving towards. If we're embodied and if we're God's creation, and if that's what's good and God is good, then those two would be maybe perfectly reflected, at least very, very close to it. So in that sense, if God is that which brings about creation through his speech, then man, as Adam, would, insofar as Adam is in a perfect state or semi-perfect state or close to it, that he would also be able to do the same with his own speech, that he would be able to bring about existence through. I mean, are we pointing at the logos here? I mean, I think we're sticking within a Genesis creation, and the logos is a Greek term, so I don't want to just force that in here unless we feel it's apt.
I think.
Do you think it's the
logos? I think so, because logos and all of its meanings, it's all tied up in there. Like the word that higher, that like in all of its levels, I think it would be there. The only thing is that like the idea of like striving, I don't know if I would say that it's the idea of striving to be God as like the goal, because then you're just Satan. So
well, wouldn't Satan be the person who tried to usurp God, be the person who's above God? That's the way I've always took the story.
Oh, I always thought that it was. I thought that was because it was the same. I thought it was just he was trying to be like
God.
as God.
That might actually be right, because the word Michael in Hebrew is a question. It's who is like God, and the translation is typically like. I've never seen another translation. So maybe Michael is the person who casts out Satan. So if that's a good translation, then Satan would try to at least be like God. Okay, that's fair. Sorry, keep going.
I think also because when Satan offers the apple or the fruit, it's like the temptation is to be like God.
Okay.
Like you
right.
And
right.
so like it seems like that would like that's the same temptation. Like he's tempting them with what he was attempting to do.
Okay. That's fair. So it is this attempt to be like God, so that there's this sense when you're in earthly paradise, it is not. So does that mean earthly paradise isn't perfect? Because I guess it can't be, given that there's a snake in it, right?
Well, I don't think So earthly paradise seems like it was perfect for the job of man. Man's job wasn't to be like God. Man's job was to be
Sure.
like the little God in paradise. The one doing things similar to God but at the lower level. Like the hierarchy was established there. So earthly paradise was perfect. It was the Garden of Eden for a reason, because that is exactly where man was supposed to be. And whether the serpent is there or not, it doesn't take, like, Satan was still in heaven. Like, there's not really, I don't think that takes away from earthly paradise, the Garden of Eden being paradise, because it's like, I don't know if paradise lacking some type of toil, because even like man still had to work, like going out, naming everything, that was his job. He had to go out and do that. And so I think in that sense, like, there is still some sort of struggle, some sort of toil, some sort of strife. And so I get, like, in that sense, like the snake being there, if we're having it like lower, like, reflections of heaven, of God, of or whatever it is that is beyond, then that makes sense to me, of having that there.
Why? Can you make any case other than a theological one as to why speech brings about existence? Because the reason I'm asking is because I've been trying to ask myself, what is the alternative to the mind-body split? Right, this notion that the mind can do whatever it wants, and it doesn't have to be bound by empirical reality, and then empirical reality is hard and fast and real, and the notion of abstracting beyond it doesn't work because everything has to be grounded within empirical reality. And I think, well, what's the alternative? The modern notion, I think, is something like it's only empirical reality, or at least that'd be the scientific notion. And I think you see this reflected in the language of the behaviorists, because the behaviorists, they moved psychology away from the study of the mind to the science of behavior. That was the terminology that they used. Like, there was a total behaviorism was the apotheosis of this. There was a total denial of any internal thought. But then I think you also have the modern notion that you can, like, modernism is defined as, at least Descartes forward. If I like to argue that it's Martin Luther forward, but at least Descartes, that you come to know being as a self-referential being, and everything exists within the mind, and everything comes. I'll leave it at that for a second. What's the alternative? What's the alternative to a mind-body split? I think it has to be something like an interrelationship between the two, unless someone can argue otherwise. But if it's an interrelationship between the two, then how do you conceptualize that? How do you make that argument? The argument that I've tried to make, and it feels like a pretty weak argument because I only have like one sentence to it, but it's something like, I'm taking this from De Anima, from Aristotle, that if I'm going to push on this particular table or this particular microphone, then what I'm experiencing is not the microphone. What I'm experiencing are these neural impulses that are coming from the tip of my finger up to my brain, and I'm feeling that sensation. So this microphone has to exist as a potentiality within my finger, within my brain, so that I can experience it. And that has to go for the entirety of the cosmos. Otherwise it doesn't even exist if I can't sense it. But simultaneously, really only the potential of this microphone exists within my finger. So the microphone itself, the external world, has to exist so that I can push on it and it can, to use a contemporary term, actualize the potential within that fingertip. Now, that's like the entirety of the argument, so it doesn't feel as strong as perhaps it should be. But we're talking about speech here being able to bring about real reality, and that points towards the logos. So I want to push on that. I want to see if I can drag you along and say maybe we can use the logos to as like the mechanism that mediates between the mind-body split. But I have a hard time making that argument. I think I can throw around some ideas, but I'm curious what you think first.
Well, it's interesting because if you think about language in general, speech is something that moves from the mind out into the material. And so in that sense, that's like speaking language communication is sort of like that participation in creation, because it's like there are these thoughts, there are these words that are like in and of themselves, they're sort of like these abstractions. They're thoughts that exist purely in the mind. And through speech, you're able to set them out into the world, have them go out and bump into other people that can hear them and think about them, and like receive them, comprehend them, think back to you through speech. And so, like in that conversational, in that conversational way, you're really you're creating a relationship. You can relate who you are as a person, who you are internally, and like make that manifest. So I think in like understanding language as something that is bringing the mind out into the world and manifesting it to not just for yourself, because like sometimes you say the darndest thing sometimes, like you even surprise yourself, but you're also speaking, and these other beings can then interact with like what was only something that was within the mind. And so I think that is sort of like the beginning of an understanding of what speech does, of what the logos is as an act of creation, of
as the creation.
Right. Yeah, I think the strongest argument for, I think a strong argument for the mind-body split on the mind half will be the notion of color. So if you take someone who has achromatopsia, monochromacy, it means you can only see in black and white. If you take someone like that and you ask them to imagine the color red, they won't be able to do so. Like the color itself, they can't imagine color. And you can think about this for 3 seconds, and you can come to some understanding of it. If I ask you to come up with a new color, it's like you physically cannot do that. You cannot imagine another color. So and if I ask you to describe what the color red is like, then you're going to be at a loss for words. If I ask you to describe what the color red tastes like, you're going to be at a loss for words. Like there's some level of irreducibility of the buzzword would be qualia, the wholly subjective aspects of our experience that we can communicate. Like I can say the word red and you're going to know exactly what I mean, despite me not being able to communicate it to you. So like describe what red is to you. So there does seem to be this aspect where we're taking our subjective experience, our subjective feelings and emotions, our perception of the world, and move our mouths so we can produce sound waves so that they can interact with your ears, and then they can go into your brain and you can understand all of that and understand exactly what I say. It's really remarkable that we can communicate, that speech actually works, that we're not all just psychopaths, automatons, I guess the scientific view would be that we are automatons, but that we can actually interact with each other and build and create with each other and collaborate. Like we can build our towers of Babel so long as we have speech at our hands in order to do so. So I think that's a strong argument. I like that argument too, and I think you can actually make it stronger because building on some of Noam Chomsky's work, there seems to be this universal grammar to which just about all languages seem to abide by. And if our language, if our cognitive capacity for language, within which the universal grammar framework is structured in, if that did not work, if that was not reflective of real reality, then we would be kicked out of the gene pool. So as a consequence, it has to work. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And we can't be here. We can't communicate via video call and communicate and whatnot. So, and otherwise we'd be dead or isolated and alone and not passing on our genes. So if our capacity for speech, if the universal grammar was not reflected in reality, we wouldn't be here. We are here, so it is. So that's also a sense of our aspect for our understanding of grammar and language is reflected in empirical being itself as well. But then how does that... Go ahead.
Oh, no, finish.
Then how does that play a role in how we create? Like it plays a role in how we collaborate. But then about bringing things into existence, I need more arguments at hand to make that claim.
Like speech itself bringing things into existence.
Right. Maybe you can make that claim with the notion of a Platonic form. I think if you bring in some Plato here, you can say, with the notion of top-down processing, the idea that you can see a cup as a cup and name it as a cup, then that helps bring it into being. And I bet you if you can bring in Aristotle too, if you say that once I'll leave it with Aristotle for a second. That if you have matter and you form it into something, and now it is taking on the form and it possesses that. If you take the amorphous block of marble and then you find the sculpture within it, and then you see it and you can name it, and you can communicate it with other people about it, then you're giving it. Are you giving it that form in an Aristotelian sense rather than a Platonic sense? But maybe you can make a case that they're the same. That an Aristotelian form and a Platonic form are the same thing. I gotta look at the Greek though to really make that argument as well.
Well, I think a big part of it, of speech being related to creation, is I think it's a very human idea. I think because it's not until we have the capacity to communicate and speak to each other that anything actually is what it is. If you think of it that way, there's that idea that the universe exists because we're there to witness it existing. Right. Sure. So that's such a human way of looking at things. The everything around me is on display for me to witness. It's a little selfish. It's a little self-centered, sure. But it's very much. I think that's kind of if you're taking a move from our capacity to talk and interact and communicate with different people, different groups. There's kind of this idea that we as humans, nothing quite was what it was or would ever be the same again after we were able to name it and we're able to communicate it. So as in the sense of discovery, these things sort of came into being as we were able to go out, meet, come in contact with them, name them, and pass on that information. And even in our language, we have I think monster and demonstrate have the same root. They're both monster. And right. So when you demonstrate something, you're removing the monster from it. You're removing the scary unknown from it, and kind of making it into something, bringing it into something more, I guess, real, more useful, more incorporated. And in that all of that is kind of you're kind of creating it as such once you come into contact with it and can transmit that data and information.
Sure. So if you can align something like a monster with the notion of chaos, which it seems like would be a reasonable thing to do, something amorphous, then that would associate itself with nature. And if you're demonstrating it, if you're articulating it, if you're naming it, then you're also taking that thing which is in nature and turning it into a form. Assuming that chaos is something like formlessness, which I think by formlessness, I think that would be the definition of chaos. That would be taking something from chaos aligned with nature into something that is formed, into something that is, I won't say real, because it's not like chaos isn't real, but it's certainly more real than chaos is.
Yeah,
more real insofar as it is limited, insofar as it has a body, insofar as it exists in real being.
Yes.
It has its place, like it is familiar in that way, like kind of like did you ever watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original Disney one?
It's been 15 years, but yeah.
So there's that one scene at
the beginning where she's running through the forest, right? It's Snow White in the dark forest. And as they're watching that scene,
it's very interesting because
when she's in the dark forest, everything around her, like, because she's so afraid and she's terrified, and so her mind is kind of concocting monsters. It's like everything around her, the branches become hands grabbing at her, the logs in the river become crocodiles, and so everything around her becomes monstrous. And it's not until she's able to calm down and take a look around and really demonstrate everything to herself, where she realizes, oh, it's just the animals, it's just the trees, everything's okay. Like she's like, it's such an interesting moment of like the world sort of falling apart around her, of like everything becoming chaos, everything becoming monsters, and then it coming back, like coalescing back together as she's able to like step into who she truly is. And so like that, so like that's I don't know, go ahead.
Do you think that means you're linking the logos, or speech at least, with the light of John, say? Because everything came into being. I'm gonna be quoting this wrong, but John, he talks about the logos a lot in his prologue, but he also talks about the light, that everything came about as a consequence of the light. So there's this sense where there's darkness, there's chaos, there's monsters, amorphous beings, and then it's through the light of the logos that. So you could think about it within Genesis too. John will say in the beginning was the Word, and in Genesis, God uses the Word, the Logos. He uses his speech in order to bring about light, and with that light brings about creation. So it's darkness, and it's light through the Logos that brings about creation. Does that seem right?
I think so.
That sounds about right, yeah. Light through the Logos brings out
creation. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And because if you think about it,
that naming really does bring things
into the light. It demystifies things. And so
it's not for nothing that like monsters are like only come out
like in the dark. Like that, like that's always been our understanding of it. In the dark is where the monsters live.
And so it's only in that sense when
you like pull these things out of the dark, of the unknown, of the questionable, even, and like you said, give them their limits and put them in their proper place. To where they're no longer monsters. They could actually, in fact, be something useful.
So I wanna poke at you on a different topic. It's related to this, but I'm curious about the Little Mermaid. I think we've talked about it a bit here and there, but there's this notion that a woman is mute, and then she has to become unmute, and she has to develop the ability for speech. You see this in The Little Mermaid, but there's an old Tarkovsky film called Andrei Rublev. There's this sin that there's this adultery that Rublev commits, with this woman, and she's mute, and he carries metaphorically carries her around throughout the rest of the film. Like that, she accompanies him. And there's another character in The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. He's an old Swedish filmmaker. That's a really cool movie. It's about a crusade. It's about a crusading knight during the bubonic plague who has a chess match with death, which on the premise level I think is like the coolest movie ever. But there's a woman in there who also doesn't have the ability to speak until she has the last word of the last phrase of the film. But it seems like the lack of ability to speak is somehow associated with femininity too, or at least lack of ability, and then you develop it. And just to round that out, it seems like we were bouncing off of Adam has this ability, and then there's Eve. Maybe I'm just not familiar enough with Genesis to make this call, but does Eve develop that ability? Because it seems like Adam is the primary mover there.
Right,
sure.
right.
Yeah,
Eve
that's a fair
speaks
point.
to the snake. So I don't know. I don't know anything about her having to develop speech. I know. I just know that she can speak to the snake just fine. That's like she's. Yeah. As far as not being able to speak being related to femininity, I don't know because, well, I don't know if I could associate that entirely with the Little Mermaid, just because she can speak at the beginning. So
but she's underwater and she's half fish, right?
She's underwater. She's half fish, because it's still the Little Mermaid is interesting because the Little Mermaid is Disney moving away from fairy tale stories and telling more realistic stories. It just like in the way they use their symbolism, because all the way up until the first three princess movies, right? You have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you have Cinderella, and then you have Sleeping Beauty. You have Aurora. And so those first two in particular, there's a book I read by Faith Moore called Saving Cinderella, and she lays all this out amazing in the most amazing way. It's called, what does she call it? She calls it fairy tale shorthand, I think. So in the first two, Snow White and Cinderella, it's very highly symbolic, and it's all using the language of fairy tales. When you get to Sleeping Beauty,
What do you mean when you say the language of fairy tales? Just like an example or something like that.
So like
not just the language, but also the symbolism. So like when I say the language of fairy tales, it's the symbolism that's being used in the story. So Snow White
and Cinderella are beautiful young women who are transitioning into not only like adulthood, into womanhood, but also into who they truly are. And so Snow White is transitioning into a woman, and she's also transitioning into the princess that she was always supposed to be. Cinderella, similarly, Cinderella is transitioning into a woman, and she's supposed to be like a lady, but Lady Tremaine took that away from her. So she's supposed to, like, she's not she's not in her rightful place. And her, like, as she's moving along, she's moving into her rightful place. Actually, a higher place is being a princess. And so the way that they look, the way that they dress, everything about them is supposed to be showing their inner goodness. They look beautiful and they dress beautifully because it's supposed to be a reflection of who they are internally. And the princes, similarly, the princes are handsome, they're dressed very well, they act in chivalrous and heroic ways. More so, you more so get that later on, but in the earlier ones, the princes are supposed to be representations of, like, they're supposed to be more like catalysts of these girls moving into womanhood. And so when you get to Sleeping Beauty, it's a little as much as I love Sleeping Beauty, it starts to get a little it's a little dissonant the way that they tell it, because there's really no reason for Aurora to fall in love with Prince Eric in the way that they not Prince Eric, Prince Philip. There's really no reason for her to really fall in love with him in the way that they set it up, because they're making it a more realistic story. They're making it about a young girl who wants to get married, and that's like her whole shtick. That's all she really has going for her. She's young woman transitioning to adulthood.
What would something less realistic look like? What would be the more idealized?
It would be Snow White. It would be Snow White and Cinderella.
That there's like this princess element to her.
So less realistic is like if you look at these examples, you have this young woman being tormented by a wicked witch in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You have a young woman being tormented by a wicked witch, and we know from her behavior and her voice and all that jazz that she is this virtuous young woman. Like, she behaves that way, we see her act that way, and by like all these things, all these interactions, we kind of get that idea that it's supposed to be that she is supposed to be in a better situation. When you get to it's more symbolic, and like it has more meaning in it. When you get to Sleeping Beauty, you don't really get much of that. Like, you see that she has a pretty voice and she is beautiful. She's been blessed. Like, she has gifts from the fairies. So like she
hasn't done anything to gain those for herself. She hasn't done anything to show us like why she is a princess. We just have the looks. And so it starts to get a little bit more dissonant in that sense, because it's kind of trying to shove a teenage romance into a fairy tale story.
Okay. So
like by the time you get
of the Mother Nature, the magical lessons to her.
Yes, like that's like the magical and like Mother Nature parts are more in the fairies and in Maleficent. Like, if you if you take the story at a more psychological level, it makes more sense, because it is more of a it is trying to go more into the realistic sense. So if you look at it as like, if you are overly protecting your daughter, when she comes into contact with something truly malevolent like Maleficent, she will not be able to withstand that, at least not alone, and she'll be destroyed because of it. Luckily, the fairies intervene so that doesn't happen. But like, in that sense, all that is in there. Like, there's all that meaning present. It's just that it's like pulling away. So by the time you get to the Little Mermaid, they've more or less gotten rid of the fairy tale aspect, and they're leaning more into the more realistic aspect. And I think you see that especially because Prince Eric is a legitimate real character now. Like, Prince Philip was more of a character than Prince Charming and Prince oh Lord, I'm forgetting what the other prince's name was. They never say their names, that's the other thing. So when you see Prince Eric, you see him like act in this very heroic way, and that's what makes Ariel fall in love with him. But she didn't decide to lose her voice because she fell in love with him. That was like the last. It's a wrong metaphor, but that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. She had always dreamed of being human. Like, in that sense, it's the same idea. It's like she's not who. Like, she knows that she's meant to be something greater. Like, she's trying to become who she is meant to be. And that's like all the stories are all about young women, girls essentially, growing into who they're meant to be. And so the Little Mermaid, Ariel, knows she is meant to be human. She is meant to be where the people are. That's the whole, like, the opening song when we first meet her. That's the whole thing. And she is pushing up against. She's more of like a rebellious teenager now because she's coming up against her father, who doesn't want her anywhere near the surface because the surface people like killed their mother. I think that's the backstory. And so you're seeing essentially a rebellious teenager rebelling specifically against something that is like narrow-minded. Like, yes, he's doing it because he wants to protect her, but he's also like him doing that is also keeping her from growing up, essentially. And so she has to that's the level of like teenage rebellion that is actually very useful in stories. It's right, the level at which, like, if you have to rebel against what is keeping you from being able to live your own life, not what's like you're not like rebelling against the culture that is allowing you to live your life is not necessarily the way to go, but rebelling against.
When you say live your life, you mean stepping into adulthood. You should be your own person, right?
Exactly. Yes, set like your own life separate from, like, obviously not completely cut off from your family, but like separate, like your own personal life.
Right.
And so she's a rebellious teenager rebelling against her father, who is essentially crushing her dreams about becoming who she is, like stepping into womanhood. And seeing Prince Eric, this heroic young man who she saves and like helps it, like puts him up on the beach, is the final thing that kind of kicks that, like, it's the catalyst that enables her to say, like, you know what, before it was just a dream, now I'm gonna do it. Like, there's nothing that's going to stop me. And that's what drives her to the witch, and then she loses her voice. She loses, like, and the important part of that is that Eric isn't able to recognize her without the voice. So she's kind of lost a part of, like, who she is, like her inner voice, like her true self, like the thing that was able to transmit who she was as a person to and so, like, it takes that much longer, and that's why, like, it gets down to like a time crunch, because she has to kiss Eric by the end of the third day, or I can't remember how long, but there's so many days that she has to where if she doesn't kiss Eric by the end of like the third day, she turns back into a mermaid, and then she's a slave to Ursula. And so, like, she has to show Eric who she is by other means. And Ursula mentions during her song, she mentions like body language and like these obviously like sensual sexual appeals to men. And Ursula is doing this, one, because she's supposed to represent that type of woman, but that type of like feminine character, that type of feminine archetype, a witch, a temptress, all that. That's who she is. But she's also just banking on Ariel not being able to do any of that. And that's not who she is. So she already knows that she's probably not going to do that anyways, because all she wants is to be able to get Ariel so that she can use that to get to Triton. And so Ariel has to show who she is, and she's able to almost pull that off. She almost kisses Eric. It almost happens. It's right there. But it's not until she finally gets her voice back that she's able to like break Ursula's, I think at that point she's Vanessa, break the hold over him. And so he's able to see who she truly is because he's able to hear her. She's able to like show who she is at like from like her inner voice, essentially. And so that's like the voice in The Little Mermaid is very much tied to who she is as a person. She's trying to show her personality, her virtue, which is something that she more or less took for granted before, because everybody knew her as having the most beautiful voice. And that's why Eric was so in love with her, one, because she saved her life, and so she's showing him that she's a virtuous person, but also like her voice, it's so beautiful. It's a representation of her own inner beauty as well.
And you could say that goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning of this bit on princesses, that there's this reflection of the internal and the external as well. That
Yes.
all the princesses dress nicely, but they're also beautiful on the inside. Do you think that what do you think? Do you think that there's any link between this muteness and femininity, though? Because it isn't obvious to me that you see mute males in any stories.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know, because
there's some John Wick movie that came out a couple of years ago, and there's a female assassin who's mute, and I think there's a new Marvel TV show where there's a female assassin and she's mute as well.
Echo.
Yes. There aren't male mute characters, so I can't figure this out. That's why I'm asking, because I've thought about this for a while, and I don't really know.
Well, I don't know. That's interesting because, like with Ariel, I would think it has something to do with them not having, like, you not having a voice, like that lack of being able to communicate, like not just who you are, but like communication is such a fundamental part of being human, like being able to communicate who you are, what you feel, but also like being able to react to the information that you get from other people.
Because what you were saying about the Little Mermaid was something with regards to her speech. It was never with any specific regard to her femininity, other than maybe the fact that she has a beautiful voice, that she can sing really well, and I think that's more associated with femininity than masculinity. But broadly, you were contextualizing it as just this is who she is as a person, not necessarily as a woman.
Well, yeah, and that's why, like, this is a more, it's a more realistic story. It's not so much in the realm of fairy tale anymore, because this is much more concerned with like who the individual person is. Like, this specific character is a rebellious, angsty teenager who is on a journey to become who she is meant to be, and along the way she's giving up a part of herself along the way. She's trying to get there through the wrong means, essentially, and so she's giving up a part of who she is, and it's not until she gains that back to where she's like able to like get the goal, like the day is saved, she gets the man, she becomes human. Like, if it was just about like marrying Prince Eric, she'd be able to marry Prince Eric without getting her voice back. But she's able to get her voice back and become human permanently.
Sure. You kept on saying trying to become who she's meant to be. I think the contemporary notions are always something like to be my true self, or to just be myself. Like that's the goal we aim at. So, but you keep on saying who she's meant to be. Is there an element of fate in that, or is this she's meant to be herself and she's just trying to achieve self-actualization or what have you? Like, why do you keep using that language? Because you repeatedly did it.
I think I use it because I think I avoid saying your true self because of how like tainted that has become. Like, when people say their true self, they say it in like, this is just like what I'm into right now, or this is like the fad that I'm following, or this is my purely hedonistic impulse. Like that,
Right.
that seems to be what it's used as. Whereas in these stories, fairy tale stories, but princess stories more general until a point, there was an understanding that these characters, by the time you got to the end, were going to be representing an ideal. like they already were in a sense some sort of ideal. They were the ideal young maiden, but by the end they are stepping into womanhood. So they're becoming so in that sense, like she's becoming who she's meant to be because she is stepping into embodying the ideal that women should be striving for. And that's what the stories are for. They're supposed to be representing, and that, like, I get so angry whenever some random feminist is like, oh, it has these unrealistic standards of beauty, all this stuff. It's like, they're supposed to be representing these ideals for women and girls to look up to strive towards. You might not get there, but or like you might not
ideal.
Exactly. You don't, like, again, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the flip side of that is saying something like, you can be whatever you want to be, which is silly because you can't be whatever you want to be. But there is an ideal that you can point yourself in that direction. And that's like the what is it, the second Wonder Woman movie, like 1984, I think, or 19 something or other. Yeah. There's that one scene where the little girl comes up to her, like, after Wonder Woman, like, blows up a building or something, and a little girl comes up to her and she's like, can I, like, one day I want to be just like you, or like, can I be like you one day? She says something like that, and Wonder Woman is like, you can be whatever you want to be. And I'm like, no, you're a literal goddess. You are immortal.
Sure. Yeah, right.
No, she cannot be like you. She cannot blow up a building and not have a scratch on her. It's not going to happen. Sure. So, like, it's, yeah. There's
so earlier, go on, sorry.
No, like, there are ways to use that ideal. That's not one of the ways. You're not going to be the ideal, but that's something that you should try and strive for.
And that ideal is best represented in the earlier princess stories. But then you were saying they moved towards a more realistic approach. And then now we're at a point where Wonder Woman is a goddess, and she's telling people that they can be whatever they want, despite the fact that being an Amazon, she's more like a goddess. So there's like this. Maybe a push back towards a mind-body split.
In the lore, she is a goddess. Like, she is. I think she is. Okay, sorry. She is like Diana, as
she's
like the goddess.
Like Artemis. She is Diana. Oh, I didn't realize she was the.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she is in fact a goddess. She was given, like, she's a goddess created, like, by Zeus, given to the Amazon queen as, like, a daughter or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's weird.
But she's not like the twin of Apollo type of Apollo.
So she has a twin.
Artemis, Diana.
From what I can remember, she has a twin, but it's a twin sister. So she was like made out of clay. So Zeus made her and, like, her twin sister out of, like, white clay and dark clay, light clay and dark clay. And so she's the one made of the light clay, and I think if unless this is like some random fan fiction that somebody made, but I think that the part of the lore is that she has a twin sister that was made from the dark clay. But she is, like, her name is Diana Prince, I think. She's Diana something.
Diane Prince.
Yeah. And so she is, and I think now there's something like her and, like, Superman had some kind of fling going on, but even Superman ages, but she's just gonna kind of be stuck there forever.
Gotcha. Okay, but before we went off on that.
Oh, right.
There was this ideal that we set forth in some of the earlier princess stories. Then we're moving to a more realistic model, and now we're at least at a back to a goddess model, but. Is there any in between? How do we get from a more realistic depiction to Wonder Woman, say?
Like, how did?
Yeah, what's that progression? I mean, we're moving from an idealistic model in Cinderella and whatnot, then we're moving towards Sleeping Beauty, where it's a little more grounded in reality. We're losing the fairy tale, and then now we're back towards an ideal. Is that just where we are in the state of princess movies?
No, it's worse.
Worse?
It's worse than
Okay.
that, because we've reverted to like viewing. We've reverted to like these goddesses, right? These superhumans. So like we no longer have women, like regular women, representing all these, because in Snow White, in Cinderella, in Sleeping Beauty, in Beauty and the Beast, all the way until Beauty and the Beast, we had regular women in these fantastical situations, but they embodied all of that femininity, all of the feminine archetype, at least the positive. And so like all the connotations of nature and life and all those were like, that was present within them. When you come to let's say Wonder Woman, as we see her, like say in that second one, when we come to Wonder Woman and we come to some of these newer female characters, like in Moana, you have the Taka and Tafiti. You either have Wonder Woman, where you have like some strange like girl boss figure who is kind of she's
a woman who acts like a man.
Yeah, like she's I suppose so. Like that's you normally see women behaving like that more often, like you like in or. So a good example is Galadriel, right?
Who's that? Sorry.
Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings.
Sorry, I have not read the books or seen the movies. No. I know, it's a sin on my soul. Everyone tells me. I get it.
Okay. So, this is a... God, I need you to watch those movies. There's a scene... There's a scene in The Fellowship of the Ring. In the first... Is it Fellowship of the Ring or is it Two Towers?
I think Fellowship is the first, and I think Two Towers is the second.
Right, but I can't.
I
think they get to Rivendell in the first one. I might be wrong, but either way, they meet Galadriel, right? Kate Blanchett, gorgeous, and Frodo offers Galadriel the One Ring. Because he's not sure, like he's having a moment of weakness, like he doesn't know if he's capable of like taking it to Mordor, so he offers her the One Ring. And when you look at Galadriel before that happens, or even after that happens, because there's like a moment where there's like a absolutely terrifying moment in between. She's gorgeous. Like it's Kate Blanchett, so obviously she's gorgeous, but she's ethereal, and she's glowing because she was able to see the light of the trees. That's another thing you won't know. But so like she is like the most picture perfect embodiment of like of femininity. And she is offered the One Ring. She's offered ultimate power, essentially. And she is like in her temptation of the One Ring, you see like what like a dread queen she could be. So I think she says that she's like, I would be, instead of I don't know, she says something like, instead of a king, you would have a queen. And she says something like, all would love me and despair. And so you have this encounter with like ultimate power represented in this woman who, up until this point, is very nurturing, is very caring. And then you get to this point where it's the complete opposite. It's like, so she's embodying both sides of the feminine in like this like goddess level type entity, because Galadriel is I think one of the oldest elves that, if not the oldest elf that you encounter in those movies. And so you have this incredibly powerful entity, but she's embodying like such a feminine energy at every level. Like if you go through and you read everything that she says, it's like it's perfectly represented in her little speech that she gives. So you have that Galadriel, which I love because she's beautiful and she's terrifying in that moment. And then you have Amazon's Galadriel in, I think, Rings of Power they came out with. And Amazon's Galadriel is nothing like Cate Blanchett's Galadriel. I don't know the actress's name. I don't know.
This is Amazon the company, not like a goddess Amazon.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay.
Yes, the company. So that Galadriel is just, they put her in like armor and all this stuff, and like they're making her, I think it's because they didn't really have the rights to the Silmarillion and some of the lore. They didn't have the rights, so they couldn't quite go into the stories of Galadriel. And so instead of trying to tell new stories using Middle-earth, as a stage, they decided to just change who Galadriel was as a character. And they just had her be a man, essentially. She's in armor, she's fighting, she's behaving so recklessly, which is so strange because at this point she's thousands of years old. So she should have some understanding of what it means, like, for diplomacy, for what the cost of war is. You would think that after thousands of years of having seen so much, she would be able to at least embody a part of that powerful feminine energy that she had in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Peter Jackson trilogy. But she has none of that. It's purely like this strange, like, masculine, like I said, girl boss. And she just goes through, anytime she can, she's humiliating some guy. Anytime she can, she's asserting her, like, dominance in every situation. And it's so off-putting because there's no, like, it's weird because they're like, we want female representation, and this isn't it. You're actually just putting more masculine or male representation. You're just having a woman do it. And so
that's quite the way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like she's acting out a feminine character. She's acting out a masculine character, and just with a female person, I suppose.
Exactly.
But that's a good way to put it too.
And so you have those characters. So you have women that are behaving like men on the one side, where you used to have these extremely, like, powerful, ethereal women, which was the Galadriel, Cate Blanchett's, Peter Jackson's Galadriel. And then you have, let's say, the goddess women, or the goddess characters that is, again, so, like, you have the women who are no longer women, so they don't have any femininity in them anymore. They're just masculine male characters in a woman's body. So you have those. So there's no femininity there. Gone. And then you have the goddesses that are supposed to be representing femininity, and really they are, like, say, in Moana. But by doing that, by putting the femininity into those goddesses, you're removing it from the women that are in the story. So like you're taking it out, you're putting it back into nature. And so like technically there's still female characters, but women no longer fill those roles. And like if you want to tell those big grand stories, you still can. Like those like what was it? Is that Sinbad? I think did it. It was like a DreamWorks movie. So Sinbad, he's a pirate. He makes a deal with Eris, the goddess of chaos, and because it has something to do with the golden apple. I can't quite remember what exactly is happening, but so you can still like tell these big grand stories and have these struggles, these fights going on with these like feminine characters. But if you're going to put and like that's kind of like what happens with Moana. Moana just goes on a male hero's journey, and the feminine archetype, the force of nature that is the feminine archetype, is just back out in the world again. There's no embodiment happening anymore. So those are like the two characters that you're seeing now. You're seeing femininity, like I think I've called it the divine force of nature before. You're seeing the divine force of nature that is the feminine archetype being taken out of women. And either you get a woman who is behaving like a man, or you just have a goddess and women no longer are behaving, or women are no longer representing all those parts of nature.
Right. So it's this total denial of femininity in any capacity, and total acceptance of masculinity, and putting female characters in a masculine form, or it's a goddess where there's devoid of any humanity in it. So it's removing the human from the feminine. Okay. So one thing that I think that I've kind of been toying with is when you're thinking about Hellenic art, what you see with a lot of the Mycenaean art, with a lot of the art in this part of the world, Greece, Persia, Italy, Mediterranean, that predates, say, the golden age of Athens. They're more caricatures. They're more the faces are more, they're more akin to masks. They're not super grounded in nature as reflected in human beings. And then once you start to move towards classical golden age of Athens, Greece, then they're more lifelike. They're more likely to get up and walk around if you're thinking Daedalus. The faces they resemble masks less, and they resemble human faces more. And I think you made this point in a small little talk you gave at Ralston, that we're moving out of Egypt with feminine gods that are more godlike, they're more animal-like, towards the Greek gods where they're gods, but they're also more human-like. So there's this push towards human beings with the divine forces embedded within them. And I bet you can make a case that that's the important turn that's made in the Renaissance too, is that it's push towards humanism. And humanism is, you could maybe say something that it's like recognizing the reflection of divinity within human beings, not like a modern humanism, but like a classical humanism. Does that seem reasonable to you? That might be like the optimal way to look at human beings as divine works of nature, or like works of nature with divinity reflected within them.
I think so. I'm not as familiar with the turn in Renaissance art. I remember some of it from Ralston, but I think that's probably a good way to define human, is a creation that is reflecting the divine, or a creation that is imbued with the divine, because like in all these senses, it's always something that's being embodied, like like these archetypes and these these things that were always associated with divinity are like symbolically now something that individuals embody within themselves. So I think I don't know if like reflecting, I don't know if reflecting is the best way to say it, but I think like imbued might be something
Okay.
that
So
sounds right.
So yeah, reflecting is kind of like it's just more the empirical scientific side of me saying, yeah, it's not really a part of it. It's just somewhere out there. But when you say imbued, like that's definitely, they're more intertwined. So
Right.
perhaps the right story, and correct me if I'm wrong then, but the right story that we should be telling about masculinity or femininity, but we're keeping the conversation within femininity, would be something like a human being who's grounded in reality, but still has these magical, natural elements, natural as in nature elements to her that establishes her as an ideal worth striving for. And we're all going to stumble and fall and fail to reach the ideal, but the ideal still stands there, and that's what those stories represent. Are those ideals that we're working towards attaining, towards bringing to earth.
Right. And like that's not really something you get until you get to um like until you get more human gods. Like the can I say that? Can I say that? I don't know if I can say that. Hold on, I might have to take that back.
Go for it.
um
In
because
principle, we
it's
can edit out whatever you want. So
no, don't, you don't have to edit it out. I'm just like rethinking that because like even like to be fair, I don't know how much like the Egyptians and the Greeks tried to be like their gods. Although I know like the pharaoh definitely was like considered the like a god more or less.
sure.
Like uh was embodying uh the god, was it Osiris? Was it Horus? It was something like that, one of them.
Well, you could definitely say that Socrates tried to work towards the gods. I mean, it seems like Plato makes that case in the Symposium.
Right, but I'm wondering if that occurs more as the gods become more human.
Okay, because Socrates and Plato are definitely later within Hellenic philosophy.
Yeah, within the superhuman characterization of gods.
Right.
So I'm wondering,
So if you're
because
thinking
like,
back to Homer, say, are they trying to achieve the gods? Maybe you can make a case. I mean, Achilles,
maybe.
he arrives shrouded in the light of Athena, right? When he finally reaches the battlefield, and he has armor crafted by Hephaestus, and Diomedes stabs a god, so and injures Aphrodite. So there's this at least element where they can interact, and where the gods inspire human beings. That's not a strict we're human beings and we're striving to attain the status of the gods, but it's close there. We could poke at that more, and I'm sure we could find something.
Yeah. There's something in and around there. You commented on I think right when the conversation cut out, you were asking why I kept using the word redemption.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were asking. Right. What do you remember exactly what you were going to ask with that? Like, was it like why I use redemption, or like why? Like, is there another term you're more familiar with, or
No, I don't think so. I mean, sometimes I just try to pay attention to the language that people use, because sometimes they'll use repeated. They'll repeat the same word over and over because they're trying to keep that as a point. You did it in this conversation too, and I called you out on it at some point. Just asking like why that word, and I know you were using redemption, so I was just kind of like when talking about Christ or talking about. I think you said something about femininity. We're trying to link the two. So I was just curious because we were talking about Rahab and
yes,
what is it, the Babel or Jericho living on the wall.
Well, I think it's because I think I remember why I'm linking it to femininity, I think the concept of redemption is something that women, especially in the New and Old Testament, would be more familiar with, because redemption is such a big part of like a wedding ceremony, because it's or it can be a very big part of a wedding ceremony, and the idea of a woman basically taking on a new life and like becoming like part of a new family, and like starting more yeah, more so starting a new life. That the redemption that is something that is like women especially would be very like are very aware of like everything that entails. um I think we've lost that to an extent because marriage isn't um quite the institution it used to be.
Sure.
But
right, if we allow for the existence of divorce, then that means that marriage has a way out. Therefore, if the definition of marriage is something you can't escape, then we've changed the definition of marriage as well. Thus, it's at least changed. Seems like it's been lowered as a consequence in its place in society.
Yes, and I think as a result of that, like that comes along with like Christianity as well not being as highly valued, because the idea of redemption is it's such a big deal. Like nobody really, like, if you're not Chris, or even some Christians don't, I don't know if they put all of that together, the redemption that happens in a wedding ceremony, the redemption like of being covered by your husband, like coming underneath his covering. And so it's the same thing that's happening with humanity being redeemed by Christ. You're coming under the covering of his blood, like that whole sacrifice.
Do you think that's just endemic to sacraments in general, or something specific about marriage?
I'll say that again.
Do you think that's endemic to sacraments in general, or something specific to marriage?
I think it's specific to marriage, because there's a tradition that the Jews had where, like, say if a woman wasn't a virgin on her wedding night, the father would have to tell the husband or the groom that he would be like, hey, it's nice that you love my daughter, and it's nice you're giving me, like, I don't know, all these goats for her or whatever. But listen, just so you know, she's not a virgin. And, like, maybe people know that, maybe not, like, whatever, I don't know. But so, like, I think part of the wedding ceremony was that afterwards you would show, like, the sheet that they, like, consummated the marriage with.
Yeah.
And, like, typically the first time that a woman has sex, she bleeds. And so you see, like, there's that spilling of blood that happened. And there's all sorts of connotations with that. But, like, so if a woman wasn't a virgin, a man would actually pierce himself to, like, bleed onto would pierce himself, like would cut himself to bleed onto the sheet, so that he would be like, as far as I'm concerned, this woman is, like, this is a new life for her. Like, I am redeeming her. Like, whatever happened before that, it doesn't matter, because this is a new life now. And I am taking her as, like, my bride. Like, it doesn't matter what happened before this. And so, like, that whole ritual, that whole ritual of, like, coming under that covering of that blood, of that redemption, that's something that's, like, also within this understanding of redemption, because the church is also the bride of Christ. Like, so there's all, and like,
Sure.
I don't think it's for nothing that in, what is it? It's Ezekiel. I think it's Ezekiel 23, where God is just calling Israel and Samaria, like, whores, like, straight out. It's a funny chapter. If you ever want to laugh, Give it a read.
Keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, if you ever want to laugh, give Ezekiel 23 a read. It's a fun time. But it like so there's that whole understanding of like that spilling of blood, especially for a woman and for the bride of Christ. For us as a church, whatever has happened before this, you're now stepping into a new life. So that's like an added layer of it. That's yeah. So there's like so women in particular have at least knowing that and knowing like what goes into like the redemption that would happen in the marriage in the marriage bed is something that like I can't not think about.
Sure. Do you think I know we've been talking about femininity throughout this conversation, but do you think there's an aspect of masculinity that's also undergoes this redemptive process within marriage, the sacrament of marriage as well?
I think so, because there's, especially when it comes to the idea of there's Adam says, for this reason a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife.
Sure.
And so there's in that same sense, like there's a leaving behind of the old and stepping into something new. I don't know if I've thought about it enough to like lay out all the ways in which it is a redemptive process for a man, but there's definitely like a newness involved. It's stepping into the next part of life, and
right.
Hopefully by that time you are prepared for it, because it's not for nothing that for millennia there were always coming of age ceremonies and rites of passage for young men, and we've kind of lost that.
Do you think that's necessary? Do you think you have to have the rite of passage as a young man? And what would that look like? I mean, does that mean I have to go off and fight a bear? What do you recommend I do in order to become a man?
Well, I think right now the best like rites of passage or those types of activities has a lot to do with sports.
Okay.
So like sports is a good way to especially like very strenuous sports. Soccer's a little lame. Sorry. In my opinion, it's just I don't know. Anytime I see a man fall down crying for, I don't know, being tapped on the ass, I can't do it.
Yeah, the modern soccer, yes, is filled with a bunch of babies who like to get fouled and whatnot.
Yeah,
it's
so
awful
like,
to watch.
Yeah, I know. I can't do soccer. But like very strenuous sports where like you have to put yourself through like rigorous training. You have to like focus your body, but like you're also having to work with other people. You have to learn to come together like as a group, as a community. And so you're honing like yourself physically, but also in a sense mentally. And so I don't know what exactly. I think it's helpful for like a young man to like maybe do like Boy Scouts or like not specifically, not travel just to like for travel's sake, but travel specifically to learn about what about different cultures and like in comparison to your own. That's something that was I'm not a man, but like going to visiting South Africa, like being there for a month, seeing how people live, behave, they're seeing like what rites of passage that they have.
Sure.
It made me realize that is something that is to an extent lacking. That I wouldn't recommend doing a Gosa rite of passage. It sounds horrific. So I think like a young man has to like go out into the desert and like find a hidden spot that only the men know of. So like
Do you get a clue? How does that work?
I honestly I don't know because they don't talk about it. Like women don't know about these things.
Sure.
Like that's so like it even becomes like a separate almost language that like men speak to other men in a certain way. If like the only
Is
way
that
you'll be
locker
able
room
to
talk?
oh, I don't know, but like
No,
like
it was just a joke.
I don't know what happens in your guys' locker rooms, dude. I haven't been in the locker room since I was like in 8th grade. But
You went to a boys' locker room when you were in 8th grade?
no, how dare you? But there's a there's a certain way that men from that tribe speak to each other. They only know how to do it if they've gone on this journey because they'll know like certain spots and certain landscapes. So like they know if you've done it.
If you can speak the language, literally, if you can speak the
language. So you have to go out there. You have to circumcise yourself, like, and then like bandage yourself, like heal yourself, take care of yourself for like so many days, and like live out there in the desert for so many days until you're like healed, and then you can come back. And that's their rite of passage. And I remember looking at that, being like, I don't think that's the way to go, but
yeah, I wouldn't look forward to that.
Could we have something? Could we have like circumcised light in this? So, but I don't know if that's me speaking as like a woman not wanting my own child to have to go through that someday. But yeah, these different things that like made boys come face to face with the reality of like almost like the reality of existence, because women come into contact with that like the moment they get their first period. There's automatically like this great responsibility that is part of who they are, like is part of nature itself for them. Like they can't separate that from who they are. Well, now they can because there's birth control, but like that's not really 100%. So like, but like men have to sort of be put into these situations that make them confront like responsibility.
So okay, so the responsibility that a woman faces is endemic within having the first period, because then now you're imbued with, okay, the potential to have children. I have to take myself and my body very seriously. Guys don't necessarily have that, so there has to be some sort of rite of passage to fill us with the sense of responsibility that's endemic to being a man. So what then does that sense of responsibility look like if you are a man? Like what? Not necessarily, you don't have to outline a rite of passage that isn't self-circumcision in the desert, but what are we aiming at? And then how then do we build, like what should a man be aiming at? Then how do we build the rite of passage?
Well, I think in that sense it would be something like a rite of passage that confers on men like the responsibility of what it means to be like a father. And so like for men it would probably be something like you have to be strong enough to protect your house. You have to be capable enough to bring home food. And you have to be social enough to not like beat your wife and children, and to have good social relationships with like other men, so that you have a community.
Do you think there's a playful playful aspect? Do you think there's a playful aspect that has to be integrated within a fully adult man's psyche that he can play with kids too?
Oh yeah, that would have to be that would be included in the social part. And I think that's why. Sure. Yeah, I think that's why. At least for that social part, sports is very important. So like for the social and for like the like physicality part, sports is very good. The last part is like the being capable, and like maybe you could like the mindset that you have to have like when you're in a sport is that like you have to like be putting your best foot forward, you have to be striving to be better and like to accomplish. And so sure. I think that's something that if you get the right coach, that's definitely something that you can instill in young men. So yeah, I think it would have to be those three things. It would have to be like you have to be like it's like you have to be a protector, you have to be a provider, you have to be not a psychopath.
Okay. And then you said coach. I mean, I assume the best coach would be your father if you're a man, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, it should be like your parents, for both boys and girls, your parents should be like the first and hopefully the best representations or examples of sure. the adult that you are going to grow into.
Right. And they're taking with them the embodiment of tradition that's coming through from their parents, etc., to the dawn of humanity. And that's what you want with you when you're becoming an adult is the wisdom of all the people who have become adults before you. Because in some sense, they're also the ones setting the standard and defining what it means to be a proper adult. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's like the hallmark of maturity is taking on tradition. Mm. Does that seem reasonable?
I think so.
And you could probably go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say because you have that trope of a man taking his son out on his first hunt, and there's a lot that goes into that. There's like at that point the boy has to already understand the responsibility of just holding a gun, and then there's that confrontation with like mortality because you're killing something in order to survive. And then again, like there's all the physicality. You probably have to go out hiking. You're probably going to be like out. You have to have enough supplies, and then you're going to have to carry everything back. And so like, and then there's like you're going to be bringing that food home. You're going to be feeding your family, possibly even like sharing it with the community.
Right.
So that's another thing.
I didn't quite realize how really delightful it is to share food with other people. Then and quite realize it until if you remember, Josh and I held a little Cinco de Mayo party at Ralston, and that's like the first time I've ever really set up a meal for other people. And I remember feeling all kinds of pressure in the moment, trying to get food out, trying to keep things warm, trying to make everyone happy, and that was really great. I really, really enjoyed that. And I kind of talked to Hannah about this a bit too, just the importance of sharing a good meal with other people. Like that's so beautiful, and we all take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's what we should all be striving for is to become mature people, take on the tradition handed down to us by our parents and our ancestors, and keep that moving forward so that we can sit down and have a wonderful meal together, have a beautiful experience together.
Yes. Not everybody... a movie just came out, or maybe not just came out, but it's called The Taste of Things. And it's a French movie. Most of the movie isn't even talking. It's just them preparing food. And it's like beautifully shot, it's beautifully done, but like... And there's also a love story involved. Like it's a little... It's sweet, it's romantic, it's a little heartbreaking. There's so much, but like you see how much like pleasure and enjoyment happens not just around preparing the food, but like the people enjoying it and then knowing that you had a hand in making this thing for people that you care about, because it's all friends that are coming together and enjoying this food and talking with each other.
Yeah. All right. I will end it there because I do have to get to sleep at some point. Okay.
Yes.
This is a great conversation.
It was great. Yeah.
I think I got to work on honing my questions, honing my topics, and trying to communicate them properly, because it feels like I kind of wander around too much, and then I lead you to wander around too much, and we get lost a little bit. But that'll come with practice. I'll just keep taking notes on myself and whatnot. There was a lot of good stuff in here. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh yeah, it was a fun time. I love getting a chance to like talk about things that people are interested in and that I'm interested in, and then we could like bounce off each other. And then like it's so great because then you get a chance to like think about things in a new way and like maybe even better than you were before.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I'm most excited about this podcast for, is just the ability to talk to people and ability to learn so much. Like just over the course of like the last 2 days, thinking about our last conversation, I was going over so many different things, putting things together that I hadn't before. I mean, that was our first conversation was great, and the aftermath of my thoughts, I think, was also great. I hope was also great. I guess we'll see. Anyways, it was great talking to you. I'm gonna turn off the recordings now. So.
All right.
Thank you ever so much for watching. If you enjoyed that conversation, then you can check out part 1 right here. Or if you like, you can check out this conversation with Costa Levine Thomas right there. It's up to you.